Coming up with a new Christmas story every year is not the easiest thing in the world. It's always a delight, and there's a process as these things incubate. Last spring that Claire and I were in Georgetown, and I saw a guy coming to shore from a very strange-looking sailboat. He came to shore in a little dinghy that he rowed, and he had a bicycle mounted in the dinghy. And he came over and tied up the dinghy and got on the bicycle and rowed away. I said, Claire, there's a story there. She said, why don't you interview him? I said, no, I'm going to make one up. And then the year went along, and I started thinking about the story. I hadn't written a word. I started thinking about it, and I met Freddie Vanderford. I did an article for the HJ Weekly on the Piedmont Blues, and I interviewed Freddie. And after I interviewed Freddie, I knew that I had to have a harmonica somewhere in my story. So I put the harmonica in. I kept trying to find time to write the story, but I kept having funerals. And I've had a lot of them, 6 in the last 2 weeks. So it only stands to reason that I should put a funeral in the story. This is called The Pirate of Winyah Bay. There are only 2 kinds of stories. One is a person took a trip. That's basically the story of the Old Testament. And it's the story of the greatest American novel, I think, one of the greatest, The Wizard of Oz. It's a story about a girl from Kansas taking a trip. The other kind of story is a stranger came to town. And that's the Christmas story. And that's the kind of story that this one is, The Pirate of Winyah Bay. Sheriff Jesse Dozier leaned against the railing on the river walk overlooking the Sampit River. The outgoing tide of Winyah Bay drained the dark water into the Atlantic Ocean, 13 miles away. The Union Camp paper mill puffed its white smoke into the night sky, shielding the waxing moon. Sheriff Dozier glanced across the water at an odd sailboat, designed like an 18th century pirate ship. This one was up to date with twin aluminum masts. The vessel looked like a pirate ship, and the lone sailor who piloted the boat was as strange as his little boat. Since his arrival in early October, he had been the talk of the port city of Georgetown. He was an older man with scraggly hair, unkempt beard. His clothing was in the style of 1970s Goodwill. He wore a beaded necklace over a dirty, tattered T-shirt covered with a plaid jacket. Faded blue jeans and deck shoes completed the outfit, except for his hat. It was a leather cowboy hat, maybe a Stetson, faded and brittle, much like his skin from too much exposure to the sun and the wind. Across the water, Jesse Dozier heard the mournful strains of a blues harmonica. The strange man aboard the ship did not speak to anyone, even when spoken to. Each night he serenaded any who strolled along the river walk with the sound of his harmonica. Jesse Dozier considered the eccentric man about whom the people of Georgetown were so suspicious. Georgetown was familiar with odd people at all seasons of the year. Eager sports fishermen who paid big bucks to go out to one of the artificial reefs and get seasick and sunburned and call it a day. Tourists with a historical bent. Burned out hippies still searching for the age of Aquarius. And sun worshipers who came to town to do the shops and eat at the restaurants. The strange man who rode his way to shore in a small dinghy every day, bringing with him a bicycle, seemed to fit none of the usual categories. He moored the dinghy at the dock and pedaled away on the bike to some unknown destination. In the evening, just before dark, he returned to the dinghy, paddling back out to his boat where he played the blues and turned in for the night. Since the stranger arrived, there had been a series of petty thefts among the residents and businesses of Georgetown County. The sheriff felt certain that the stranger was somehow connected to those robberies. Others in the town were convinced he was the thief. On December 20th, the morning dawned gray under an overcast sky. A front was pushing in from the west, with threatening rain later in the week. Sheriff Dozier walked to Pete's barbershop. There was a Baptist preacher in the chair. Pete was working on the pastor's hair, a very impressive pile of hair on top of the pastor's head. Pete shaped it, molded it, leaving some mud flaps around the ears. And then he asked the pastor, "Does it look all right?" The pastor said, "Yes, it looks fine." The pastor said, "How much do I owe you?" Pete said, $10. The pastor somewhat reluctantly produced two $5 bills from his pocket and left the barbershop. Now the conversation in the barbershop could improve. No longer did they have to use the Revised Standard Version. They could tell their jokes and say whatever they wanted to say. It was time for the sheriff to get in the chair. As soon as he got in the chair, people started asking questions. When are you going to arrest that guy? You know, that creepy guy who comes in on the bicycle every day. I don't know who he is, where he came from, but he's certainly the one who's doing all the robbery. You know, somebody stole a leaf blower off the porch of the Kaminsky house yesterday. The sheriff asked, "Reckon what that leaf blower's worth? $39.95? No. That leaf blower's worth a whole lot more money than that. The Kaminsky house is a National Historic Site. Surely that's a National Historic leaf blower. And somebody stole a chainsaw from behind Carolina Grill. What in the world does Carolina Grill need with a chainsaw anyway? Have you ever had one of their steaks? They use a chainsaw to cut the beef." After his haircut, Sheriff Dozier went to the Cripple Crab Cafe. He sat at a big table near the kitchen. Lorene, a chewing gum popping waitress, brought him a glass of water with lemon and coffee with cream. Jesse sipped his coffee and read the Georgetown Ledger. The theft of the leaf blower and the chainsaw were reported. There'd been a report almost every day of something being stolen. Jesse turned the evidence over in his mind. Few clues, but the town was restless. They wanted the thief brought to justice. Many people were absolutely sure that the culprit was the old man who lived on the boat and came on a bicycle every day. His boat was anchored off of Goat Island. It looked like a pirate ship. So they started calling him the Pirate of Winyah Bay. Richard Mulkey, a member of the county council, walked into the restaurant. When he saw Jesse at the back table, he headed straight for an empty chair. The two men shook hands. Lorene brought Mulkey a black coffee with 3 packs of sugar. "Sheriff, have you made an arrest yet?" "No, not yet," said Jesse. "I really don't have any reason to make an arrest. I know somebody's stealing, but I don't know who it is." "You know as well as I do who's to blame," said Richard Mulkey. "It's that vagrant on the bicycle, the one that folks call a pirate." Jesse looked him in the eye. Richard Mulkey was a bank president. He was a member of county council, and he had the personality of Attila the Hun. "Jesse, we want an arrest by Christmas. I've talked to other council members. If we don't get an arrest by Christmas, we're going to start looking for a new sheriff." Jesse rubbed his bald head. "If I make an arrest, I'll have to do it when I have evidence." At that moment, Hank Mulkey walked into the restaurant. He came straight to the back table, sat down next to Richard Mulkey. Hank reeked of stale cigarette smoke. "What are you up to?" asked Richard. "Just trying to get my Christmas shopping done," answered Hank. "How can you Christmas shop without any money?" asked Richard. "I was hoping you could help me with that, cousin." "Don't call me cousin," said Richard. "But we are cousins," said Hank. "Your great-grandfather and my great-great-grandfather were first cousins. That makes me your 5th cousin, twice removed." "That's hardly any kin at all," said Richard. "Still, it's kin," said Hank. "And I like being kin to the bank president and a member of county council." Richard changed the subject. "Have you still got your mother?" "Yes, she's in the back of my truck." "How long has she been dead?" "Going on 4 weeks now. She died right around Thanksgiving." "And when are you going to bury her?" "The day after Christmas." Sheriff Dozier spoke up. "Why have you waited so long?" Mama told me she wanted a Christmas Day funeral, so I'm going to bury her on Christmas Day. But you're not going to honor her request. You can't bury her on Christmas Day. No, I can bury her the day after Christmas. That's as close as I can get. I'm going to bury her as soon as I can get a man with a backhoe to dig the grave. I'm going to meet him out at St. Stephen's AME Church down in Arndale on the 26th. He's going to dig the hole, and I'm going to lay Mama to rest. Why there? Asked the sheriff. You don't go to that church. No, I'm a Baptist most of the time, I guess. I really don't go to any church, but I'm burying my mama at St. Stephen's because I won the cemetery plot in a poker game. Jesse Dozier just shook his head. Lorene brought Jesse 2 scrambled eggs with grits, sausage, and brought Richard a seafood omelet with dry whole wheat toast. Hank, what are you going to have? She asked. I'm going to have the hungry man's platter with 3 eggs over easy, bacon, sausage, grits, hash browns, 3 pancakes with maple syrup, biscuits with jelly. I'd like a glass of orange juice, a glass of milk, a cup of coffee with sugar and cream. Lorene wrote it all down. Would you like anything else, Hank? Yes. What's that? Add your tip to the bill and give it to my cousin Richard here. Jesse Dozier paid his tab and left Lorene and put on his hat and walked out the front door. There was Hank Mulkey's battered old flatbed truck. It had a wooden body with 2x12 sideboards. He used the truck in what passed as a landscape business. Actually, he did more cutting and clearing than planting. He did spread mulch, usually pine straw he had gathered illegally from the National Forest. The bed of the truck was lined with a thick layer of fragrant needles. And there in the bed of the truck, nestled among the pine needles, was a simple wooden casket covered with a tattered, dirty quilt. The pirate of Winyah Bay was not the only strange person in Georgetown, Jesse thought. He was not even close to the strangest. The sheriff went to his office at headquarters. He kicked back in his chair, put his feet up on the desk. The words of Richard Mulkey went through his mind. We expect an arrest by Christmas. The pressure was on. After a few moments of reflection, Jesse called his deputy, Sheriff Ray Williams, to his office. Ray was a strapping young man who had served in the Marine Corps. He paid strict attention to details. His shoes were always polished, as was the brass on his uniform. If anything, he was a little too gung-ho for Jesse's taste. Still, he was a reliable man. Jesse posed the question to the young officer, Ray, what do you think of these robberies? Sheriff, it's all nickel and dime stuff. It's all petty theft, power tools mostly, nothing over $1,000 or so, and it's all stuff that could be easily pawned. But I checked all the pawn shops in town. Nothing has turned up in any of them. He must have somebody out there in the country somewhere fencing for him. Ray, what details are we missing? We're just one arrest away, Sheriff. We need to arrest that creepy guy who comes ashore every day and rides off somewhere on his bicycle. I followed him all the way to Arndale yesterday, but I lost him when he turned onto a dirt track on that bicycle and went down toward the woods in the Santee area. He's up to something, but I don't know what it is. I think we need to arrest him. He won't say anything. He doesn't talk to anybody. He doesn't speak even when people speak to him. But we need to arrest him, run some prints and a sled check, and find out who he is and what he's up to. The dispatcher interrupted their conversation. Sheriff, we have another robbery reported. It's at Jenkins Hardware out on 521. Sheriff Dozier left the office. As he did, he said to Ray, see what you can do. When Sheriff Jesse Dozier turned his patrol car into the parking lot at Jenkins Hardware store, a crowd had gathered. Jesse walked slowly inside. When Dave Jenkins saw him, he went straight to the sheriff. Dave shouted, Sheriff, it's about time you got here. Somebody stole the portable television set from me. I think it was this man. He said, pointing to an old man with straggly gray hair and a long beard. He came in here and bought a pack of brass wood screws. Did he pay for them? Asked Jesse. Yes, he did. But I'm missing a portable black and white television set. I think he took it. When I accused him, he didn't even say anything. He just stares at me like he can't understand. Jesse turned and looked at the man. Fella, what do you have to say for yourself? The old man stared at the sheriff and said nothing. Jesse raised his voice. "Tell me your name." There was no reply. Jesse spoke again. "Sir, you're under arrest for suspicion of burglary. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." The old man did exactly that. He remained silent. Jesse put the cuffs on him, took him to the patrol car. He saw the man's bicycle and a dirty canvas backpack. He picked up the backpack. It was completely empty. He put the bicycle in the trunk of the patrol car and walked back inside the hardware store. "Dave, he doesn't have your television set. He rides a bicycle and carries a backpack. Sheriff, you've done the right thing. He's nothing but a robber. All my customers call him a pirate without a hook or a patch. They call him the Pirate of Winyah Bay. I don't know how he did it, but he got my TV. He must have hidden it or handed it off to somebody. Dave, we'll find out what the truth is." Jesse drove the patrol car back across town to headquarters. He looked in the rearview mirror at the old man. His face was completely devoid of emotion. His skin was like tanned leather. His face was pockmarked with scars. His reason for arresting the old fellow was mostly to protect him. It would give him the opportunity to do a background check with SLED, but as far as the sheriff could tell, the old man had done nothing wrong. Glancing back, Jesse saw a flatbed truck in his rearview mirror. The sheriff turned to the side road and the truck went by. It was Hank Mulkey with his mama's coffin in the back of the truck, out for a ride. Sheriff Dozier knew that he was going to have to investigate that. He would have to go to Cromer's funeral home. But first, his eccentric prisoner had to be booked. At the jail, Jesse fingerprinted the man who cooperated fully. He again asked the man his name. He said nothing. He removed the cuffs, searched the man. He had no identification. His only possessions were a harmonica and a well-used Gideon New Testament. Jesse thumbed through the New Testament and was surprised to find passages marked. Jesse took a picture of the harmonica and the pocket Bible and returned them both to the man. The old man sat alone in his jail cell with nothing to say. When the doors closed, the old man played the blues. Sheriff Dozier ran a check on the fingerprints with the State Law Enforcement Division. A match was found and a long list of previous arrests. The man's name was Paul Christopher, also known as John Doe. He had been booked on a charge of vagrancy in Murrells Inlet in 2003. In 2005, he'd been arrested in Beaufort, South Carolina on a loitering charge. In 2008, he was arrested in Charleston for jaywalking. In early 2011, he was arrested in Little River on a suspicion of panhandling. In every case, the charges were dropped. Sometimes there were notes, but usually not. But occasionally a brief comment. After about 3 months, the suspect departed in his boat. A more lengthy comment accompanied the arrest in Charleston. The only thing we could find out about this man was that in this city, he lived among the homeless people. He provided them with food and clothing. He was known on the street as the Jesus Man. Jesse put the report aside and considered the evidence. He had arrested the man on suspicion of theft. He had booked him as John Doe just the way law enforcement had booked him in other South Carolina ports. Whatever Paul Christopher was up to and wherever he came from, he aroused suspicion. But as far as Jesse could tell, he had done nothing wrong. After lunch, Sheriff Dozier called Lewis Cromer at the funeral home. Lewis had a 3 o'clock funeral but would speak with the sheriff for a few minutes if he came right on out. Jesse and Lewis Cromer knew each other. They'd been in high school together. Jesse Dozier got to the funeral home. They had a cup of coffee together. And then after some small talk, Jesse said, "Lewis, do you know what Hank Mulkey is doing, riding his mother around in the back of that truck?" Yes, I know. Tell me about that casket that Hank has his mother in. It looks almost like a homemade pine box. He bought it from me. It's just a plain wooden box. It has no metal in it. I ordered 2 of them last month. They're intended for Orthodox Jews. I don't get much call for them, but occasionally a member of Temple Beth Elohim will request one. What does that mean? Well, Orthodox Jews have a burial custom that requires that the body of the deceased be washed with warm water by members of the community. Jewish law stipulates that the body must be buried quickly following death. The body is laid to rest in a simple wooden coffin. The body is never embalmed, and it's not appropriate for the body to be displayed. Orthodox Jewish funerals never have an open casket. The casket has no ornamentation other than a wooden Star of David. So why did Hank Mulkey put his mama in a Jewish coffin? I can assure you, Jesse, it had nothing to do with religion. It's the least expensive coffin I have. Was his mother embalmed? Yes, the law requires that. Unless she's embalmed, she has to be buried immediately. Why is he waiting till after Christmas to bury her? Well, to tell you the truth, I think he spent all the money on a casket. He didn't want to pay me for any of our regular services, so we embalmed Ms. Mulkey, put her in the casket. Hank paid me in small bills and loaded his mother's body in the truck and drove away. Lewis, you said you had 2 of these wooden coffins. Can I take a look at the other one? Jesse, I don't have it. You mean you sold it? No, it came from the manufacturer with a defect. There was an open seam along the bottom. I was going to send it back to the company. I had it in the garage out back, and somebody stole it. You didn't report it. No, it was hardly worth the trouble. But if anybody tries to bury a dearly departed loved one in that flawed coffin, the body will be soaking wet after the first hard rain. On his way back to headquarters, Jesse pondered, well, who would steal a casket? Late in the afternoon, Jesse released Paul Christopher from jail. The sheriff returned the dirty backpack and the bicycle. The man pedaled away toward the dock along the river. As darkness fell, he secured the bicycle in the dinghy and rowed back to his unusual sailboat. The pirate of Winyah Bay was back in his home on the water. Deputy Sheriff Ray Williams was a gung-ho ex-Marine. He'd not been a law enforcement officer very long, and if he had not been, he would have lived right on the edge of the law. His methods of dealing with suspected criminals were not always approved by the sheriff, but Deputy Williams had a reputation for getting results. Usually, Sheriff Dozier looked the other way. At the Crippled Crab Cafe, Lorene sauntered over to Deputy Williams, popping her chewing gum. Ray, you going to have your usual, hun? Yes, Ray answered. You don't seem too chipper this morning, said the waitress. Rough night, said Ray. My wife has been feeding a kitten, a stray kitten. She knows how much I hate cats. And she's been feeding this stray behind my back. Last night I heard a noise out on the porch. I pulled my service revolver and went outside. The ugly, scrawny kitten was crying. I kicked her like a field goal right off the porch. A little kitten, Ray? I hate cats. All cats. I've got no use for them. Anyway, my wife went crazy. She said if she couldn't take a cat in, I had to get rid of my dog. Lorene poured coffee in Ray's cup. What kind of dog do you have? I've got a chocolate lab. He used to be a drug dog, but he got so old the Coast Guard retired him. One of my old Marine buddies gave him to me. A chocolate lab. I like chocolate. What's the dog's name? I named him Barney Fife from the old Andy Griffith show. You know, the character played by Don Knotts. So you and your wife had a cat and dog fight. Yeah, rough night. You're telling me, said Lorene, we had a knockdown drag out at my place last night too. What happened, said Ray. My old man was snoring. He snores a lot. I couldn't get to sleep. I couldn't get him to get up and go to the couch. What happened? Asked Ray. You know that cattle prod I bought at a yard sale last year? I didn't think it would ever work, and I wasn't sure how I would ever use it, but I have a perfect solution for snoring. Lorraine, that's probably against the law. I bet you won't be snoring tonight. She poured a cup of coffee for Ray. Might not be any tonight if the Mayan calendar was right. What are you talking about, Ray? The Mayans say the world's going to end today. Just who died and left them in charge? Lorraine, how have you missed this? It's been all over the news. Those news people just make stuff up. Ray, you mark my word. Come tomorrow morning, there'll be a lot of Mayan people scrambling to get their last-minute Christmas shopping done. They best have things on layaway at Walmart. Outside on Front Street, Deputy Williams paused to consider his plan. It would stretch the law, but he would get his man. The means would justify the end, he thought. In the distance, he heard the 6:30 freight train whistling and rumbling through town. On this shortest day of the year, Ray Williams was standing next to the Riverwalk at dawn. He saw the strange man rowing the dinghy with a bicycle across the bay toward him. As the man tied up the dinghy to the cleats on the dock, Ray walked down the ramp, blocked the man's path. When the old gray man started to go around him, Ray tripped him. The bicycle fell into the water. Ray jerked the man up by his jacket, slapping handcuffs on his wrist behind his back. The deputy barked, "You're under arrest for public drunkenness. Anything you say can and will be used against you." The old man said nothing. Ray pushed him up the ramp, around the front street, locked him in the back of the patrol car. At the county jail, Ray fingerprinted the man, searched him, finding only the Bible and the harmonica. He pushed the man into a cell and locked the door, dropping the Bible and the harmonica into the top desk drawer. Now we've got him, he thought to himself. Later that morning, Jesse Dozier finished his breakfast at the Cripple Crab Cafe and drove his patrol car to his office. He looked over the night report. There had been another burglary. This time a weed eater had been taken from the shed at the shrimp dock. I guess they use it for seaweeds, he thought. Anyway, it was one more theft in Georgetown. There was a pattern now. Most of the stolen items were tools with small gasoline engines. Just the kind of thing that could be pawned without rousing suspicion. Besides, Ray had checked all the pawn shops in town. Ray Williams walked in. "Good morning, Ray." "Got our man, Sheriff. I arrested that creepy guy who lives on the boat." "On what charge?" "Public drunkenness." "Was he drunk, Ray?" "He sure acted drunk. He fell on the ramp going up from the dock." "Did you do a breathalyzer test?" No need for that. He was drunk all right." "How long ago did you arrest him?" "It was about daylight." "Without a breathalyzer test, we don't really have any evidence. Take my word for it. He was drunk. I was in the Marine Corps. I know a drunk man when I see one. I got him for you. You decide what you're going to do with him." "Ray, where are his possessions?" "There's some kind of little book, I think a Holy Bible, and a harmonica in the desk drawer." "How about his bicycle?" "What are you talking about? Where is his bicycle?" "It's in the water. He was so drunk he dropped it into the water." "Ray, go get the bicycle." "It's in the water." "Go get it, Ray. You saw where it fell. Get the man's bicycle and bring it to me." Ray left the office in a huff. Jesse Dozier considered the mysterious gray man. He was sure now the man was not stealing, but he was up to something. With a weekend ahead, followed by Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, the sheriff knew he would need to get search warrants. At the courthouse, he found Judge Maddox. The judge owed him big time. Jesse had stopped the judge one night on Highway 17 North, up near Pawleys Island. The judge's car was weaving through traffic like Jeff Gordon was driving. When Jesse stopped him, he quickly saw that a woman was in the car who was not Mrs. Maddox. The judge introduced her as his cousin. Jesse said, "Take your cousin home and get off the road, Judge." From that time on, Jesse found the judge to be most cooperative with just about anything he wanted. In the judge's chamber, Jesse said, "Judge, how's the wife?" "Just fine, Jesse." "And how's your cousin, Judge?" "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" "Judge, I need a warrant to search a boat anchored out in Winyah Bay." "Isn't that the Coast Guard's business?" "I think this is a special case since the occupant comes ashore every day and seems to have established residency in our harbor." "Is that the fellow they call the pirate?" "That's the one." The judge called his secretary and had her prepare the paper. "One more thing, Judge. Anything for you, Jesse. I need a search warrant that will allow me to open the casket in the back of Hank Mulkey's truck." "What's that about? I know he's crazy, but isn't his mother in that coffin?" "Maybe, maybe not. I'd like to be able to take a look for myself." Again, the judge directed his secretary to prepare the papers. "Thank you, Judge. Hope you have a Merry Christmas." "Same to you, Jesse. And by the way, if you see my cousin, don't bother to speak. We've had a falling out. Just forget you ever met her." Outside, Jesse stashed the warrants in the glove compartment of the patrol car and returned to headquarters. Just before noon, Thelma Greer walked into the sheriff's department. "May I help you?" asked the receptionist. "I'd like to see Sheriff Dozier." "Let me see if he's available. Your name?" "Thelma Greer. Sheriff knows who I am." After a moment, the receptionist said, "Yes, the sheriff can see you." But Jesse Dozier came out of his office to meet Thelma. "Thelma, how are you doing?" "Pretty well, Sheriff. And how are your children?" "They're doing fine, every one of them, still in school." "That's a good thing, Thelma. They need a good education. What can I do for you?" "Sheriff, I'm looking for a man, a real good man." "Thelma, you've been looking for a real good man for as long as I've known you." "You got that right. I've had my share of sorry ones." "Tell me who you're looking for, Thelma." "He's an older man with long gray hair and a full beard. He wears an old plaid jacket, blue jeans, and what looks like a leather cowboy hat. Sheriff, he rides a bicycle." "Thelma, why are you looking for him?" "Sheriff, you know I'm the women's missionary leader at St. Stephen's AME Church. We started a soup kitchen back in the summer. Every day we have close to 100 people who come to our kitchen for a hot meal." The sheriff interrupted, "And this man's been coming all the way out there to eat?" "Well, he does eat, but that's not why he comes. He comes to help. He serves meals to the people who come to the soup kitchen." "Does he wash his hands before he serves the meal, Thelma?" "Yes. He scrubs up to his elbows, takes off his cowboy hat, puts on a plastic hat, and wears plastic gloves. He's about the most sanitary man we've got." "So why are you looking for him, Thelma?" "Because he didn't show up this morning. I was afraid something might be wrong." "Thelma, do you know his name?" "No. The man can't talk. He can't hear either. He's a deaf mute, except he can sure play the harmonica. I'm not sure how he does it, but he must be able to hear a little bit to play music like he does." The sheriff thought about this for a moment. The very man that Thelma was looking for was in his jail cell. "Thelma, you're telling me that he's a good man." "Yes, sir, he's a good man. He gives us $100 every week to buy food for the soup kitchen." "Thelma, if I find him, I'll let you know." "Thank you, Sheriff. I knew I could count on you." Sheriff Dozier thought about what Thelma had told him. Where did the mystery man get the money to give to the soup kitchen? Surely he must be running drugs, selling drugs. There may be drugs all over that boat. The boat would have to be searched. Deputy Ray Williams returned to the office. "Jesse, I got the bicycle out of the water, finally. I had to use a crab line and a treble hook to bring it up. The thing was covered with mud. I cleaned it up and locked it up out back." "Thanks, Ray. Let's grab some lunch. Then we're going to go search the boat while we've got Paul Christopher behind bars. I'll bring my old dog. Old Barney will find out what we're looking for." Jesse Dozier found the harmonica and the Gideon New Testament in the desk drawer and took them back to the cell where the old man was resting on his cot. Jesse handed him the items. When the door closed, the sweet sound of the harmonica filled the jail. Sheriff Jesse Dozier, Deputy Ray Williams, and Barney Fife, the chocolate lab, loaded into the police boat and motored out to the pirate boat anchored off of Goat Island. They tied up where the dinghy was usually moored. Jesse gave instructions. Ray, move slowly. Keep your weapon holstered unless necessary. Keep Barney on a leash so you'll have him under control at all times. Follow me. Yes, sir. Ray Williams wrapped the leash around his right wrist into a tight lark's head knot. Jesse climbed the ladder onto the deck. The dog leapt from the police boat onto the sailboat with ease, pulling Ray quickly up the ladder. As Sheriff Dozier and Deputy Williams boarded the boat, they noticed a sign posted above the cabin. This property is protected by Smith & Wesson. So the pirate has weapons on board, said Ray Williams. Jesse thought that somehow the sign didn't seem to fit Paul Christopher. Still, he'd been around long enough to know how unpredictable people can be. It was good that the man was locked up back in town. The dog sniffed the boat from bow to stern, from starboard to port, but found nothing suspicious. We need to search the cabin, said Jesse. He tried the door. It opened easily. If he has drugs on board, he's not trying very hard to hide them. When they entered the cabin, Barney Fife immediately began tugging on the leash, pulling the knot tighter, dragging Ray through the small galley back to the sleeping area. The lab stopped, sniffing something on the floor next to the back wall. He's found something, said Ray excitedly. Jesse turned his flashlight toward whatever attracted the dog. It was a plastic pan filled with kitty litter. Ray, he's found a cat. Ray cursed. Jesse raised the beam of his flashlight, examining the bunk, following the light up to a shelf above the bunk. He stopped the light now, illuminating green eyes. Not 2, but 4 green eyes of 2 very large cats. The cats hissed. Barney Fife barked. Ray cursed and tried to reach for his service revolver. His right hand was numb and disabled by the knot around his wrist. He couldn't reach the weapon with his left hand. Barney had effectively disarmed him in the face of his most hated enemies, cats. Just then, the cats jumped in a simultaneous assault. One cat landed on Barney's back, biting and clawing the chocolate lab. The other cat went for Deputy Ray Williams, knocking off his hat, biting his right ear and his nose, and clawing his face and neck. Sheriff Dozier reeled backwards, swatting at the cat on Ray's back with a flashlight. Ray was screaming and cursing. Barney was yelping. Suddenly, Barney bolted out of the cabin, jerking Ray behind him. The cats abandoned their prey as the dog leapt from the deck into the cold water of Winyah Bay. Deputy Williams followed, yanked into the water by the tight knot around his wrist. The cats scared at Sheriff Dozier, hissing one last time before returning to the cabin. Jesse slammed the door and retreated down the ladder to the police boat. He started the motor and circled to pick up Ray Williams and the dog from the dark water. Once in the boat, a shivering Ray Williams had blood streaming down his face. That salt water burns, he said. We've got to get you to a doctor. Those bites and scratches will get infected. Barney will have to go to a vet, too. Cat wounds are serious business. Ray wiped his face with a handkerchief. For a minute there, I thought the Mayans were right. I thought the world was coming to an end. After a moment, Ray added, Jesse, the man's not smuggling drugs. He's smuggling wild animals. That's a federal offense. We've got him dead to rights. Those weren't wild animals, Ray. Those were pets. I saw their vaccination tags. They also had name tags. Names, asked Ray. What were their names? We can't say we weren't warned, said Jesse. The cats were named Smith and Wesson. After getting medical treatment for the deputy and the dog, Jesse returned to his office. He ran another check on the strange man, this time with the FBI. The results came back quickly. The man's name was Paul Christopher, also known as John Doe. The FBI report showed that he was the only child of Michael Christopher. Michael Christopher was a wealthy Boston merchant. Both Mr. and Miss Christopher had died in a plane crash in Scotland 10 years earlier. Their entire fortune was left in trust to their son, Paul. Paul Christopher had an arrest record as long as Jesse's arm, from Key West, Florida to Portland, Maine, very much like the record he had accumulated in South Carolina. with charges that were always unsubstantiated and eventually dropped. This time there were more notes. For example, in Jacksonville, Florida, Paul Christopher worked as a maintenance worker in a shelter for homeless children. He had contributed money to the shelter every week. In Baltimore, Maryland, he had anchored his boat in Chesapeake Bay, came ashore every day to volunteer at a local food pantry. Again, he had donated money every single week. In Key West, Florida, he worked as a volunteer in an AIDS hospice, caring for people who were dying of HIV. He never stayed anywhere longer than a few months and made a profound impression on those who got to know him and on those who first suspected him of minor crimes. Jesse Dozier was ready to go home. It had been a long day, and the world had not ended. Before he left, the sheriff released Paul Christopher, returned his bicycle. The man pedaled to the dock, making his way back out to the boat. On Saturday morning, December 22nd, Jesse Dozier went to the Cripple Crab Cafe. Hank was there, reeking of stale cigarette smoke. Jesse parked next to Hank's flatbed truck. Hank was sitting at the counter inside the restaurant, eating a fried egg sandwich. They had some conversation. Jesse told Hank that he wanted to examine the casket in the back of his truck. He said, "You're not going to disturb my mother, are you?" He said, "No, but I am going to take a look." And he showed him the warrant. And so outside, Hank said, "Okay, that's what you want to do, take a look." So the sheriff pried open the lid, removing the pegs, the wooden pegs. And he looked inside, and sure enough, there was Jesse's mama in the casket. "Don't she look natural?" said Hank. "She's your mama, all right." Jesse replaced the lid, covered it again with a quilt. "I hope you're satisfied, Sheriff. On your way, Hank." Jesse ate his breakfast and tried to decide what he was going to do for the day. He decided that he would just cruise. And so he spent the morning cruising down Highway 17 south, traveling as far as the Santee River. He came back to Georgetown, ate lunch at the Burger King, and then drove north up Highway 17, up through Waccamaw Neck, as far north as the Horry County line. He was back in Georgetown by 3 o'clock. He drove through the Krispy Kreme, picked up a couple of donuts and a cup of coffee, and headed out Highway 521. Up ahead, he could see Hank Mulkey's flatbed pulled out of a side street. Jesse followed at a distance. Hank drove at a safe speed. The casket was clearly visible. The sheriff followed, trying to keep a couple of cars between him and the flatbed truck. He could see that Hank was smoking a cigarette. Hank seemed to always be smoking a cigarette. Jesse saw him flip the cigarette butt out of the window, but it did not hit the ground. The smoldering cigarette landed in the bed of the truck. Pine straw sparked into a small blaze. The blaze flamed around the coffin, catching the quilt on fire. Jesse turned on his siren and his flashing lights. Hank pulled off the side of the highway. Jesse turned the patrol car sideways, blocking all eastbound traffic. Now the fire roared high into the sky. Jesse radioed, demanding a fire truck. Hank abandoned his truck and ran to the median. Then there was a terrific explosion. The casket had blown up, sending flames into the dry grass along the shoulder of the road. It was as if Mrs. Mulkey had been caught up in a chariot of fire like Elijah. Jesse expected to see her sudden return to earth. But no. What fell to earth was pieces of leaf blowers, weed eaters, and chainsaws. The coffin had been filled with small gasoline engine tools, stolen from the good people of Georgetown. The fire truck arrived, quickly putting out the flames. Hank's truck was a total loss. Jesse walked to the median, placed Hank Mulkey under arrest, and took him to the patrol car. "What's the charge, Sheriff?" I'll let you know when I get it all sorted out, Hank. Sheriff Dozier asked the fireman to collect all the evidence from all those tools that had blown up. He opened one lane of outbound traffic. The fireman cleaned up the site before opening the other. On the ride back to Georgetown, Jesse asked, Hank, where's your mother? Where's her body? She's back home in the garage. I have her in another box. Will you see that she gets buried? We'll talk about that later. Hank, do you know what happened back there? No, I thought the Mayans might have been right. They just missed it by one day. What happened was that coffin you stole from Lewis Cromer was defective. It had a bad seam on the bottom. When you loaded it up with all those gasoline engines, some of the fuel leaked out and ran into the bed of your truck. That created a big fire in your truck bed. The heat caused the engines inside to explode. You're lucky to be alive. Back at headquarters, Jesse booked and printed Hank Mulkey. He was charged with 7 counts of petty theft, reckless driving, public endangerment, and other charges pending. Jesse sent a short email to Richard Mulkey. Arrest made. Suspect says he's a relative of yours. Sunday, December 23rd, there was a light drizzle. Jesse decided he was going to go to St. Stephen's AME Church in Arendale. He'd certainly heard a lot about it recently. And so he traveled out down 17 and off on a side road to the AME Church. He was there in a worship service. Thelma Greer was there. And lo and behold, Paul Christopher was there, the pirate of Winyah Bay. And there, Jesse heard Paul Christopher play the harmonica. Christmas Eve brought a gray day, a hard rain. Cripple Crab Cafe was a gathering place. Dozier was there. Ray Williams came in, his face still black and blue with Band-Aids all over. It's raining cats and dogs, Jesse said to Ray. I don't want to hear anything about cats and dogs, he said. The community decided right there in the cafe that they needed to do something to honor this man that they had all suspected. A man they had not treated very well. Now they understood that he was a deaf mute, that he could not talk. But as they thought about what this man had done, they said, you know, he really has set a good example for all of us. He showed us that we need to be caring for other people. We need to do something to honor him. They decided right there that they were going to have a special day for this man, a Paul Christopher Day. It would be December the 26th. And on that day, they would honor the man that was known as the Pirate of Winyah Bay. On Christmas morning, somebody called Sheriff Dozier at his home. The pirate is gone. It was Richard Mulkey. The pirate is leaving. Get as many people together as you can and meet me at the dock, said the sheriff. When Jesse arrived at the dock, 30 people had gathered there, including a dozen or so boats. They could look off in the distance and they could see the little sailboat headed out of Winyah Bay, out toward the lighthouse, toward the jetties. The sheriff and the people decided they would go after him. They wanted to say something, some word of appreciation to him. And so on Christmas morning, you have a flotilla of boats following this little pirate-shaped sailboat out to the mouth of Winyah Bay. Just as they reached the jetties, they were blowing horns and sounding sirens, and they suddenly realized he couldn't hear any of that. And so they fell silent. His sails were up, and they heard the harmonica. And the harmonica was playing a song. And they listened, and they joined in.
Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away to a home on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away, fly away. Oh, fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. When the shadows of this life are gone, I'll fly away. Like a bird from prison bars of floor, I'll fly away, fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Just a few more weary days and then I'll fly to a land where joy shall never end. I'll fly away, fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away, fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away, fly away.
So a stranger came to town, not a pirate, not even an old man, but a little baby. And he came in a way nobody expected, out back in a manger. He showed us how to live. He was the Son of God, and he taught us how to live. And through his death, the Son of God took away the sins of the world. And through his resurrection, he gave us the promise of life eternal.